Today, I have the honour of speaking with Naoimh O'Connor, and Naoimh is Research Careers Manager in UCD. And we will chat about why interdisciplinary researchers will never be unemployed. So Naoimh, first question for you today is, where are you located and what's been keeping you sane during this lockdown?
Thanks very much, Patricia, and thanks for the invite. Sane is probably a bit of a stretch, but I'm at home with my my husband and my toddler turned preschooler in this year. Probably Peppa Pig and Doc McStuffin has been keeping us sane. Yeah, I guess I work with great colleagues, and the clients that I work with really help to normalise a situation that can be considered anything except normal.
Well, I'm sure you have your hands completely full there, but Naoimh, let's move on. You are Research Career Manager in UCD. Can you please tell our audience about that role and what makes you so passionate about what you do?
So I work with postdoc researchers who are on temporary contracts and across all disciplines. And the main function of my role is to support researchers to transition to careers that are satisfying to them, whether it's in the academy or beyond. So I work closely with colleagues in HR and in UCD research to design and develop supports and services. And so that's everything from one-to-one coaching to training to workshops to working with cross-sectoral partners to develop events.
Wow, that's a lot. So I really want to talk about your title next, if that's okay. What an intriguing title. You say interdisciplinary researchers will never be unemployed. Maybe you'd like to tell our audience a little bit more about this.
Yeah, it's a big statement. I think probably if to unpack it, you know, when you're a postdoc researcher, oftentimes you're meeting a really uncertain employment market. And I think the narrative is that it's more and more difficult to secure a permanent academic job. I think the reality that I'm working with is that, you know, if you have a PhD, you're one of the least likely people to end up unemployed in any case, statistically. It may not be what you thought it was going to be, the job that you end up getting. And that's the piece of work, I suppose, that a lot of what we you know, that we're involved in terms of service provision. That's a lot of the work that we're doing, is looking at, well, what's your transferable skills and what else have you got to bring to either an academic or a cross-sectoral role. Okay. And I think the main difference that I see with interdisciplinary researchers, so not just researchers who understand their discipline and can work in a multidisciplinary team, but actually have that flexibility of thinking to work from a different paradigm. The main difference I see is that they really bring a fresh approach to an application, and they're able to align themselves to the work of the recruiter. And that's really exciting for a recruiter to see, whatever the sector is, whether it's in the academy or beyond.
That's really interesting, and I am sure our audience will have a lot of questions about that. So don't forget, we will answer your questions now in the next section. So please do remember to submit those via the chat function. So Naoimh, last question for you in our first chat is, have you noticed any unforeseen opportunities in the face of COVID-19?
I think I see the challenges that early career researchers face ramping up. I see more concerns for early career researchers, and I suppose I'm seeing more of that coming through the service. But on the other hand, there are definitely work from home opportunities that researchers perhaps are considering jobs that they wouldn't have before, because they actually, part of the postdoc profile is maybe wanting to settle down or wanting to find a place to you know, build your career and build your life, and not having to take another temporary contract on the other side of the world. Yeah. And having the opportunity to work from home means that researchers are now considering and being successful at securing roles across sectors, but from home. And I think that's a really interesting development.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I even want to ask you more questions about that, so I'm sure the audience do, but there are loads of questions flying in already, and let me just read the first one out to you. Oh yeah, okay, here's one to start. What is an interdisciplinary researcher? Someone who has a flexible attitude or flexibility of thought?
Well, I think obviously I'm not an expert in this field. There are researchers who look at what interdisciplinarity actually means. And I think, in terms of defining yourself as a researcher, it's very important that you consider, are you interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary? Have you even gone beyond that into transdisciplinary? But to me, when I see an interdisciplinary researcher, what that sets them apart is that they can actually work from a different paradigm. So they can't solve the problem that their research is presenting without actually thinking from a different set of principles to do their research. So it's very important for them to work as part of a team. And that's not essential for all multidisciplinary researchers. I'm sure there's somebody here that's far more expert in the field who'll disagree with me, but I think I see that difference in putting an application together with a researcher, that they can actually consider the problem from multiple perspectives, but in a really rich way.
Okay, really interesting. And here's a question about, I suppose, more what you actually do, the support you give. There's lots of questions coming in around this. So it's saying CV for industry is quite different to a CV for an academic job. And do you help postdocs create appropriate CVs?
Yep, I think that's what people often think the careers office is for. It's that people come with their CV in hand and think that that's really the piece of work. A lot of what we do is support researchers to really consider what they want. So if you're a postdoc, then you've already pursued the PhD, you've managed a project from beginning to end independently, or at least with guided mentorship, but with a focus on where you want to go with your own career. And when you come through that, about 60% of people with a PhD will go on and do a postdoc. And then out of that, the literature would suggest that probably by their fourth or fifth role, they've decided to transition to another area, in part because the jobs that are being offered by the academy require more experience than the person is willing to stick around to complete. But also because people actually find they have skills that work in other fields, and their work can actually be done in other areas. So the non-academic CV is that's the term that's used. I kind of think it's probably more valuable to think in terms of cross-sectoral research or cross-sectoral work. And so that's probably the last thing that you need to worry about as a researcher, is getting the CV right. Because once you know what you want to do and you know how the role will bring you there, then everything gets much easier. So a lot of what we do is actually expose researchers to other sectors, to postdocs who've moved on, who are really satisfied in what they do and are able to explain in very simple terms what they do on a day-to-day basis, if it's in a policy organization or in a funding organization, or if they've moved to an SME or a startup or a larger company.
Okay, wow. So there's loads of questions around that in terms of the supports, but you've pretty much gone through them. In terms of, I'm sure if somebody contacts you, they get to know the supports, but interesting to move it back to kind of transferable skills and interdisciplinarity. A really interesting question here about what are the most valuable transferable skills in the humanities?
I think when I think of transferable skills, I always think of a job description. So I think researchers are very concerned about defining themselves and profiling themselves. And I think that's very much, an academic concern. But I think the important thing you have to think about is what's actually required for a role. So wherever it is, and then that you translate what you did into what's required. And I have yet to see somebody bring me a job description where they feel like they can do the job, where when we dig into what's required in the role, they can't actually identify metrics to show that they're able to do that job. And that's really the skill. It's like, it's not an art. It's not an art form to identify transferable skills. It's a science. It needs to be very focused on the evidence that you can display to show what the skills are required. So rather than listing, you could say project management and communication skills and public engagement skills, or making really difficult information accessible to multiple audiences. You could say those things, but what you really need to be thinking about is what's required of the role, and then how do you have evidence to display that or to demonstrate that.
So actually, you've hit on a number of points of other questions that have come in here, and I'll try and merge them for the sake of time. But here's one: in your CV, should you flag activity across multiple fields? I suppose it's back to the job description. It's what job you're
applying for. And how to make it's all about relevance. People keep asking, should I naturally people ask questions like, should I put my hobbies or should I put other activities I've done or vocational work or volunteer work on my CV? And it comes back to what's relevant to the role, and work is work. So, if you were a cyclist for 10 years and you happen to be the treasurer of the cycling team, and now you want to work with SFI and they happen to have a remit that's all around health, certainly it makes sense to beef that up as a really relevant experience and skill set that you have. But yeah, absolutely, it comes down to relevance.
Okay, and actually this is a very interesting, because going back to interdisciplinarity now, there's a couple of questions around this. I'll read the two of them out that I see right in front of me. Are interdisciplinary researchers sometimes seen as jack of all trades and master of none? And then how does one become an interdisciplinary researcher? So,
okay,
so merging those two.
Yeah, the main concern I would see is that funding agencies do appreciate the interdisciplinary focus of researchers, and I think it's really required in any of the new, say, Horizon Europe funding that's coming through. That's really required. I'm not sure the university individual departments are necessarily caught up to that yet, and so it's really important, if you're an interdisciplinary, if you're a young interdisciplinary researcher, you're trying to get into a field where you're merging areas, that you get really good mentorship on where to publish and making sure that that area is actually recognised by the department that you're kind of thinking to work with. And you kind of want to be thinking that way, that you're not just going to do this interdisciplinary PhD and then see where it takes you. You do want to think in terms of practically, what is my profile going to look like at the other end of it? So get good mentorship in terms of publication in particular for interdisciplinary researchers, and then be smart about where you choose to apply and align what you do to what they're about, as opposed to coming in as I'm a researcher that's doing something cutting edge, completely different, and I'm going to offer you something completely new. Rather, I solve a problem that you've got, or I bring something extra to what you're already doing. Okay. And sorry, Tricia, remind me the second question.
Oh yeah, sorry. I scrolled down. So it was should you flag activity across multiple fields on your, well, again, I think that's based on the actual
the job
on
and
the actual job, I think. Yeah. But here's an interesting one for you, Naoimh. What are the career issues that people are most likely to come to you with?
Well, they tend to be I want to make some kind of plan for myself, or I want to have some kind of an idea where I'm going to be in the future and I have no idea where to start. It can be something like that. Or it can be, I'm stuck. I've gotten to a certain point in my career and now I'm stuck. And I think the earlier that we meet people, so when postdocs come into UCD, they're invited to a career orientation within the first 3 months of their contract. And at that, we introduce them to a lot of professionals around the university who work to support them in their job, but also in their longer term career. And I think the earlier that people are aware of the pitfalls and the issues that can arise throughout the postdoc contract, then the more prepared you are to be one of the successful ones. So I suppose we bombard people with maybe not too fun statistics at the start, so that you can kind of have a realistic understanding of the research careers landscape at the moment, in order for you to decide where it is you want to go with your career. And then rather than thinking 2 months towards the end of your contract, I better go check out where I'm going to get my next job. It's much more that you transition comfortably into where you want to go.
Okay. We're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to kind of run through the last. There's a lot of questions here. I'll try and get through one or two more. This is a very interesting one, and I know you have a background yourself in psychology. So doubts have been raised about the fairness and worthiness of the personalities test, like the Myers-Briggs. You are a practitioner of the Myers-Briggs test. What do you think of its merits and shortcomings, and should we all be following what it says?
Well, first off, I don't use the Myers-Briggs as a test at all. So we do the Myers-Briggs personality exercise. And I suppose I base everything I do on feedback from postdocs. So the first time I'd ever do a workshop, we always use the feedback that the group give us to move it on to the next, whether we'll run it again or not. And I guess what postdocs themselves say is that this awareness exercise really helps them to understand how better to communicate with people who think differently to how they do, how to position themselves particularly for interviews, to talk about, because it's a strengths-based approach. The idea is that you're looking at how to make the best of aspects of your personality that are that you've got preferences for. So it's really around understanding your preferences, and then how to make sure that you choose environments that energize you rather than exhaust you. And I think that the feedback that we tend to get is that postdocs are often surprised at how practical and how useful their new awareness is, and that's what they tend to come back and tell us. So I guess I would use the test it and see approach. I don't really believe in applying any one model to everybody, but when it works, I think it's worth using again.
So interdisciplinary almost personality test as opposed to just one. We're completely out of time, and there's a lot of questions here around undergraduate and PhD supports, because you've mentioned a couple of times postdocs, but maybe actually people can contact you directly about this. But I kind of want to finish up on one particular question, and that's been kind of a thread through everything I've seen coming in on the feed just now, is why do employers want interdisciplinary researchers? Why?
I think researchers don't, or companies don't necessarily, employers don't necessarily go out looking for interdisciplinary researchers. But when you are one and you think that way, you have that particular attitude in life, which is I solve problems. However I go about doing it, if I have to learn a new computer language, or if I have to approach an old scientific problem with a new paradigm, then that's how I'm going to do it. Kind of systems thinkers. And startup companies, SMEs, successful multinationals, public policy agencies, anyone who's a kind of a cutting edge thinker really values that way of thinking, because you're not just, you're able to align what you do to what they do. And that's really ultimately what an employer wants. So I'm not sure they're going out actively looking for interdisciplinary researchers, but I certainly find it much more straightforward to help somebody with that attitude to tailor themselves to an application.
Really, really interesting, Naoimh. And what a way to finish. And I'm sure we've left our audience wanting so much more, but unfortunately we are completely out of time. So huge, sincere apologies to all of those who I didn't get to all their questions. But I want to take this opportunity to say a huge thanks, Naoimh. Thanks so much for a great, fascinating conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks a million, Patricia, and thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome, and thanks so much to everyone for joining in. Don't forget, you can sign up at zoomforthought.ie, where you can check out our list of upcoming speakers. And thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you all next week on Zoom for Thought. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks a million. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Naoimh.